Welcome. So if you're visiting with us or following along online and don't know, my name is Charles Plemons. This is a study of the book of Esther. And we are moving right along through it. We're going to do a little bit of review and finish up some of our slides from last week. So we were looking in chapter 6. And just some quick review. So the king wasn't able to sleep. He was restless. And so he called for his officials to come in and he asked them to read the records of the court. Seems like a pretty good plan. That would put anybody to sleep, I would think. So he's listening to this record and it is reminded to him, one of the footnotes in the record was that Mordecai had uncovered this plot and saved his life. And so he just starts pondering. He said, what did we ever do for Mordecai? And all that they'd done was just written in the book. So the king is then thinking, well, I need to reward this man. And so he's pondering how he's going to do that. So he sends his servants out, but he's basically find whoever's around. You know, I need to bounce some ideas off of somebody. Go find somebody. And he goes out and he finds Haman. Now, Haman has come here for what purpose? He's decided he's going to kill Mordecai. He's already convinced the king to do this decree that's going to kill all of Mordecai's people, and Mordecai included. But Haman just can't wait. He's come to ask to kill Mordecai. So the king brings him in, and he's like, hey, I really want to honor somebody. What should I do to really, truly honor someone? And Haman automatically assumes he means him. And so he comes up with all of these ideas. He's saying, hey, why don't you take a robe that you wore and put it on this man? Why don't you find the horse that the king has ridden and march this man around through the town and declare, have the most authoritative prince or servant declare, this is the man the king wishes to honor. And so the king thinks this is a great idea. And he says, hey, Haman, go and make this happen for Mordecai. So, crushing blow to the ego of Haman at this point. So Haman goes out and he does as the king is commanded. So he's now very upset. He goes back and he's talking to his wife. He's upset. And remember, his wife and her friends had convinced him that, well, maybe they need to hang and kill Mordecai. Now they changed their tune. What is their message now? What was that?
He will not prevail.
Why? Yeah, if he is a Jew, you will not prevail against him. So that reveals to us this understanding, this knowledge of the Jewish people and how God takes care of them. Isn't it interesting that they know this, and yet they're talking about the people that they've decided they're going to kill? I mean, how do they think all of this is going to work out? It seems contradictory statements, doesn't it? If he's a king, or if he's a Jew, you won't prevail against him, yet the king has declared they're going to kill them all off. It's just interesting, some of these kind of changing opinions. All right, so we started talking about how these seemingly insignificant events are all playing into God's plan. He's using all of these things to deliver his people. The king couldn't sleep, so insomnia was being used. The records were being used. So God is allowing these things to work for the greater good. So just the everyday kind of things that we go through, sometimes that's part of God's plan. We don't necessarily see the flashy kind of things happening, but we need to have faith that God is in control. God knows what he's doing, and he can use all of these things to his purposes. All right, so were we ready now for this slide right here? Yes. All right. Let's see here. All right, so on this slide, we note how seemingly insignificant events, so this is what we were just talking about, then God is orchestrating these things. He is pulling the strings, so to speak. So what we perceive as being random may not be random at all. all these little pieces. Again, I want you to picture your life, my life, all of us, these dominoes that are happening. God has put all of these things, and all this stuff is falling as God would have it to do. So all these things are one leading to the other, leading to the other. If you've ever watched some of those really elaborate kind of domino displays, sometimes you'll see them moving along and they'll hit something and then that thing spin and all kinds of fancy things happen as the dominoes go along. And that's really neat. But how many dominoes are needed just to lead up to the big fancy parts of that display? Well, sometimes that's our lives in God's work. All the little things have to happen to lead up to these big moments that happen along the way. But they're not random. All right, so we need to remember that God is unseen, but his direction is unmistakable. He is sequencing events. He is in control of events. God is all-knowing. He knows what has happened. He knows what is going to happen. And so we look at a very, very small sliver of time. And we look around and say, well, I don't see God. Well, if you don't see God, maybe you're looking too closely. Back up a little bit. Broaden your vision a little bit. See all the ways that God is working, maybe in a smaller scale on a bigger purpose. All right, we also now see pride coming in here. Haman's pride. And he has executed his own humiliation. He had puffed up himself and he proclaimed all these great things that he wanted the king to do, and then he ended up having to do it. So his own pride led to his humiliation. Now we talk about things like pride comes before a fall. Well, we haven't seen Haman's full fall yet. That's imminent here. But he's completely humiliated because of his pride. And then we also see Mordecai, his honors delayed, but it was perfected in a public display. So let's think about an application in our lives for a moment. Mordecai was loyal, and the king noted it, but there wasn't this immediate reward. But eventually, Mordecai is paraded in front of everybody and proclaimed this wonderful individual. Well, isn't that kind of like the Christian life? Where does God make a note about us? We talk about the book of life, right? Sometimes the things that we're doing in God's service, being the loyal servant, maybe, just maybe, that little note is getting written down in the king's record. And eventually that's going to be read and that's going to be proclaimed. And on the day of judgment, enter in. Welcome. There's that parade. There's that robe. There's that crown. There's that mansion. Sometimes we look for God's rewards right here on earth. And there are plenty of rewards that God gives us. But sometimes we're thinking, well, where's the grand thing? I've been serving God. It's just not working out. Well, we see here an example. We see an earthly example. God's teaching us a spiritual lesson here. Sometimes the king's making a note, and when it's time, he's going to reward you. He's promised to remember us. He's made that note. We see that example here with Mordecai. All right, a couple of lessons. So we've mentioned this, even the small, let's talk about hidden events can be part of a divine strategy. Not everything is going on out in the open. Have you ever had a situation in your life where you think everything is falling apart, and then all of a sudden someone reveals to you that they were working on something or doing something, and you're just shocked and surprised because these things have come together? Maybe your friends have done something or your family, and you didn't know about it. Well, God works that way many times. There are things going on that we don't know about. I think about Elijah saying, oh, just take me now. It's all over. It's just me. And God tells him, no, there's plenty of others. You don't know who they are, but they're out there. Well, sometimes that's our lives. These hidden things that are going on, God is still there. God is still working. He's working through his people. But doesn't he tell us, don't do everything that you're going to do good out in public and scream it from the rafters? Well, sometimes those good things that are being done are unseen. They're hidden. You don't know until things are revealed. Pride often builds its own downfall. When we had a Proverbs study a while ago, this is a constant lesson out of Proverbs. You know, this idea that pride comes before a fall. We see that with Haman. We're going to see it again with Haman here shortly. And then this is an important one. Our timing may not matter. It's God's will that ultimately prevails. And we tend to think of things in very immediate, short-term kind of time frames. God's will can play out over very long time frames. You see, in the wilderness, the Israelites wander for 40 years. That's a long time for God to do something. Not in God's timeline. You see the Israelites go into captivity, 70 years. Here with Esther, this is 100 years after that. In a human life, that's a long time. But for God, that's not. So we look at things and we're like, well, God's just not being active. Well, sometimes the plans that God puts into motion, it might take 40 years for things to play out. And that's all right. His timeline, his ways are not our ways. So sometimes we want immediate results, but God is always in the long game. All right, so a couple of questions before we move on. And I encourage you all to share, because if you don't, then you're stuck with just my stories, and I only have a few. So if you've been in my class before, some of you have heard my stories before. All right, so first application question. Have you ever seen things that seem random events in your life that align with God's plan? Seemingly random things that come up. Anyway. Yes, sir.
I'm 4 years older than Joyce. We were at the same high school. And when you're a senior in high school, you don't have any intersection with 8th graders. But God had a plan, and 4 years later, our paths crossed.
Yeah. Seemingly random, right? Yeah. So we never know what events God is going to use for positive purposes. But a lot of things are not random. And I'm not saying that everything that happens is planned by God. There is randomness. We talk about Ecclesiastes 9:11. It talks about randomness, chance. We've got billions of people on this planet making choices that are contrary to God's will, that cause effects. There is randomness. But sometimes it's not random. It's God putting pieces of dominoes into place. All right, so next question. How might pride blind us to hidden traps or to God's redemptive plan? How might pride blind us to hidden traps or God's redemptive plan? Any thoughts on that?
Well, there's an idea of confirmation bias. So you're going along with a plan and you're seeing all this, information coming in. And there may be some information in there that's giving you an indication that this plan is not going to work. But because of your pride, you're only paying attention to the information that says, oh, this is going to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, we bias our opinions. Great example. Have you ever looked out in your life and you wonder, well, how can these people be living this way? And you think about, don't they read the Bible? Don't they know better? They should be doing X, Y, or Z. and then you're sitting there in the pew Sunday morning and Hiram or Neil preaches a sermon, and you realize that you've been living in a way that, somebody could be thinking the same about you. Your pride has blinded you to the reality. You look at others and you're like, oh, how could they be doing it? And we forget to look at ourselves. Sometimes our pride makes us think, I'm better than I really am. That happens to us. All right, one more question. In what ways can we trust God's timing even when recognition is delayed? What are things we can do to trust God's timing? Pray about it. Okay. That's a great one. We need to talk to God. Be patient. That's right. We need to be patient. We need to talk to God.
Count your current blessings.
Count your current blessings. Absolutely. Yeah, sometimes we're looking for that reward to be some big, grand thing. And yet when we look around, how rich are we as a people? Solomon never got up in the morning and took a nice hot shower in his hot and cold running water. What would he have given to have a shower like most of us enjoy? We're blessed. We're rich beyond belief. But sometimes we don't see that. Any other thoughts on that? All right. So in our conclusion slide here, we see that Esther chapter 6 is marking a turning point. We see Mordecai honored, Haman humiliated, and we see God's invisible coordination. And before I pull up the next point, I just remembered a conversation Andy and I had at the end of class last week. He pointed out that it's possible that the king didn't even realize that it was the Jewish people that he had sentenced to death. Can you imagine that happening with this king? When we read this, Haman had said there's a certain people that are against you, and the king's like, oh yeah, let's get rid of them. It didn't say it was the Jewish people, and this is a rash king. This is a volatile king. It's entirely possible that he didn't even ask who these people were. So that's a possibility. So Andy pointed that out to me, and I thought that was an interesting point to make. So I just wanted to bring that up. All right, our last point on this slide before we move to the next chapter. So this chapter encourages us to remain faithful when we're not singing, when God's not singing. And we need to be confident that God's providence is always leading, it's always working, it's always there for us. Chapters like this help us be encouraged in that. All right. Section 8, which is chapter 7 of the book of Esther. So things are really going to ratchet up now. So let's read, how about the first 6 verses of chapter 7? Somebody read that for us. Chapter 7, 1 through 6.
So the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted you for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen.
All right, thank you. All right, so things are now turning quite bad for Haman. All right, somebody pick up there and verses 7 through 10. So it's a very short chapter, verses 7 through 10.
Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace alone. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I'm in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided.
All right, thank you. Okay, short chapter. Got right to it, didn't it? Things escalated, as they say, quickly. So things go very badly for Haman right out the gate here. So we're at this second banquet. Remember, the queen had asked, once again, we've been referring to it as a party, that, hey, can I have another banquet, another feast, another party with you and with Haman? And we get a little bit more insight, and I think party is really not a bad term for this when we look at it. So what are they doing at this banquet? Drinking. How many days have they been involved in this? Yeah, this is day 2 of drinking at this banquet. This is not like a formal sit-down kind of feast, okay? This is a celebration. So the king has been drinking, possibly now for days. And so he asks the queen once again, what is your request? What do you really want? I keep asking you up to half of the kingdom, and you keep saying, hey, can we have a banquet? He knows that she's up to something, right? He's not a fool. So he knows that she is appealing to the things that he enjoys. So he's still willing to give her whatever it is that she wants. And so now Esther reveals her identity. She reveals that there is this threat against her people, and until this point, she's hidden the fact that she is a Jew, and that was on the advice of Mordecai. But she has now revealed that. So she says, let my life and my people be given at my petition. And so she is now explaining to the king that someone is threatening them. All right? So she speaks very boldly. She speaks wisely. But she also now, whatever happens, she's revealed that this is her people. She's now aligned her fate with that of the Jews. And now we've got a drunken, volatile king. Esther still wasn't out of the woods yet. Okay, so she has done all these things to try to get him to the point where he would be favorable to her petition. But you still don't know exactly how this man is going to react. It's entirely possible that she could say, it's this man Haman, and he had promoted Haman. Haman was, as far as we can tell, his favored servant. Guys, how easy is it for you to turn on your best friend? Have you ever seen relationships in trouble when you have friendships and marriage, and people choose friendships over marriages, and this is not a traditional kind of marriage? It's not outside the realm of possibility for this still to go very badly for Esther.
Well, he can get mad at her for lying and not being honest before about who she was.
Sure, there's all kinds of ways that this could have gone south. Absolutely. Absolutely. And he's drunk. And he had ordered the sea be whipped. I mean, this is a very volatile individual. All right, so she has aligned herself with her people. So the king now, he asks this question, well, who is it? Who dares do this? Who is the man? And so Esther, she gives some conditions before she just blurts at Haman. She describes him as the adversary, describes him as the enemy, describes him as being wicked. And she has declared that it is Haman. Now, how does Haman take this news? Why? Would you be? Yeah. Yeah.
Like everybody else, he didn't know she was a Jew.
Right. He had no idea. He had no idea. So all of a sudden, the drunken, volatile king has learned that you have declared to kill his favored queen. Yeah. Haman is absolutely terrified. The king, what's he do at first? Yeah. He's so mad, he gets up and he walks away. He's in a rage and he just has to leave the room. He's furious. But you can also imagine him trying to process this too, right? Here is his queen. Here is his favored servant. He storms out. In the meantime, what does Haman do? He's begging and pleading. And in this begging and pleading, how does he end up? Falling across the couch. All right, so let's see if we can't paint a picture of this. She seems to be reclining on this couch or sitting on this couch, and he's begging with her, and it seems that he has fallen across it, perhaps across her, and right when the king walks back in. So the king, who is already feeling betrayed by his favorite servant, he's already mad, he's already drunk, he walks in, and what does he assume when he sees Haman falling across the queen? Assault. Yeah. How dare he? So that's not what's going on, but it's a misunderstanding. But the king assumes that Haman just has the audacity. Not only is he going to try to kill the queen, he's going to assault her too, right here in the king's palace. So, do you think that did anything to calm the king down? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so here we have the king absolutely furious. And so he says this, and at the end of verse 8, I like what it says here. It says they covered Haman's face. What in the world happened there? They covered his face. How might we explain that? They put a bag over his. Yeah. So you've seen people that maybe grab from behind or arrest or whatever. You can imagine the guards here basically have grabbed him. They could have dropped some kind of cloak or something over him. They're restraining him. They have grabbed this man. They're holding this man. And then we have one of the eunuchs. He comes to a great idea. What does he suggest to the king? Hang him. Not just hang him. Hang him where?
On his own gallows.
Hang him high. On his own gallows, the one that he had built for Mordecai. Now, isn't it interesting here in verse 9? I suspect that there's some more conversation that goes on right here than we are told. Because what does the eunuch know? It says, the eunuch, he says, behold, indeed, the gallows standing in Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai. Well, how did he know that? Haman's wife knew that. Haman's wife's friends knew that. Haman came to the king to ask to be able to hang Mordecai, but he didn't get those words out because he had to honor Mordecai. So we don't see a point where he has blurted this out, right? Yes, sir.
Chapter 6, verse 14, while he was at his home talking with his wife and friends, he said, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet. It's possible they might have learned something there.
They could have overheard them talking. Right.
They definitely saw them.
They could have seen the gallows.
It would
Right.
be hard to miss.
It'd be very hard to miss. Yeah, so we have the eunuchs. So they have either overheard something, but we're not told for sure. Or it could be that Haman may be confessing during this time, trying to save his life? We don't really know. But somehow it's revealed that the eunuch now is aware of what this gallows was built for. So we have a couple of possibilities on how that was known. So the king, he hears about this, and what's the king's order? Hang him. Hang him on it. Hang him on the gallows. All right, so then Haman goes through a long appeals process and is dragged out for years, right? No. Haman was the most influential member of the king's court 1 second and is dead on a gallows the very next. It wasn't a slow fall. It wasn't a prolonged thing. It was, here's this man who is prideful and has glorified himself and all of that worldly power, none of it mattered at all. Instantly, he is laid low and he is dead on that gallows. None of it mattered. None of it saved him. None of his worldly influence could do anything for him. So he's hanged on the very gallows that he built for Mordecai. So we see justice. And it's unfolding. It unfolds in a very fitting way. It's a very poetic way. The gallows that he had built to kill Mordecai are used to kill him. And we see a reversal of fate here. But we still have a problem. Yes, sir.
I like how, so I'm reading something along with it, and it brings up Psalm 7:14-16. It says, "Behold, the wicked brings forth iniquity, yet he conceives trouble and brings forth falsehood. He made a pit and dug it out, and has fallen into the ditch which he has made. His trouble shall return upon his own head, and his violent dealing shall come down on his own crown." So it's like, literally, exactly what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
7:14-16.
Psalm 7:14-16.
There's another one too. In the book of Proverbs 26:27, he who digs a pit will fall into it. He who rolls a stone will have it roll back on him.
Yeah. So all these different ways of harming people, we see it coming right back. You know, God is a God of peace. God is a God of love. Here we see people choosing to do harmful things. And sometimes people do awful things to people. Sometimes it turns right back around on them. Here's a great example of that. All right, so that's the wrong slide, isn't it? No, that's the right slide. It's just similar to the one we had earlier. Yeah. All right, so we have these seemingly insignificant things that we talked about. All of it is aligning for them to be delivered. But we still have a problem, don't we? Even though Haman has been killed, what did the king already do? He made a decree. Well, that's no big deal. He's the king. He can just stop it, right? Why not? Yes, so the set of laws for the Medes and the Persians is once the king makes a decree, that's it. Even the king can't undo this decree. So we have deliverance, yet we got to figure out how that's going to come. So the king is aware now, but we've got a problem. All right, so we saw that Mordecai was elevated, Haman was destroyed, and we don't see any miracles at play here. But we definitely see the hand of God in all of this. If nothing else, if you want to dismiss God working behind the scenes and you want to argue that God wasn't doing anything else, you have to at least give recognition to the fact of how Mordecai and Esther lived and practiced godly principles in their lives leading to this event. The loyalty of Mordecai, the respect of the queen, all these different things that they were doing, living by God's principles. If nothing else at all, God did. His teachings led to this. You can't dismiss God in this any way you look at it. You just can't. So, we're seeing the perfect blend here of human courage and divine providence. So much of what God accomplishes in this world comes through us as His servants. But we have to have the courage and we have to have the conviction to carry it out. God is counting on us to be those dominoes, to be the thing that pushes the next event. And we don't know how little or big those next things are going to be. Esther's fighting for her life here. Esther didn't know that this is going to be recorded in a book that here, many, many years later, we're all standing around and talking about. It seemed like a big deal in her life, but it was a bigger deal than she could ever comprehend. All right, so sometimes those big reveal moments bring justice with a poetic irony. He mentions, Psalms or Proverbs and Psalms. We have these examples where sometimes that justice it plays out in a way that's like, wow, you almost couldn't write this as a better story. Yes, sir.
And it also happens often enough. We still have sayings about it, like a person getting hoisted on his own petard, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So this is not like an isolated example.
Right. Or they're just desserts. Yeah. Or they get what's coming to them. Yeah. Absolutely. This is built in to our culture still because we know this happens. All right. So God's invisible hand, I'm going to argue it's not all that invisible. It is visible. It's visible in the timing. It's visible in the courage. It's visible in how all these things are working together. If you will stop and you will step back and you will look, you can see these things all working together. So we talk about Esther as the book that doesn't talk about God, doesn't mention God. You don't see God. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. You don't see Him speaking. You don't see the words, but you see it in the actions. Absolutely there. And that's so important to us because that's how so much of our life plays out. We're not listening to God speak directly. We hear Him through His Word. But we are living in scenarios that are very similar to Esther because we don't see those flashy kind of things. We have to live by faith. We have to trust that the actions that we're taking are moving toward God's divine purpose. So we see the queen and her quiet courage. It unlocked the national rescue for her whole nation. All right, so some lessons for us. Trying to wrap this slide up. I think we've got just enough time to finish this section. So, boldness in truth-telling matters, even when risky. Boldness in truth-telling. Sometimes we know that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, but sometimes it's not just that you have to be truthful. Sometimes it takes effort to be truthful. Sometimes we have to speak on things that it would be easier if we just sat silent. Sometimes we have to live in such a way that puts us at odds with what the world would teach. You have to be bold in the truth of God, even when there's risk. Have you ever said something that puts you at odds with people in the workplace or in your family or among your friends because of your Christian beliefs? It requires that boldness. Sometimes it doesn't work out well. Sometimes it works out better than you would ever expect. But regardless of how it's going to work out, we still are required to be truthful in action and in word. Divine timing is key. So God works through those everyday moments. So again, I'm trying to drill home this idea for all of us as a takeaway from this whole study. I want you to picture those dominoes falling. All those little things. There's nothing that you're doing as a Christian that doesn't matter. Every single thing that we do is pushing that divine plan forward. Every time that you pray, every time that you get up and read a scripture, every time that you volunteer to do something in the church, every single action is pushing those dominoes forward. And they're pushing them in ways that you may never see or understand. You don't know how you're inspiring someone. You don't know how you're helping someone. But all of that matters. And it matters throughout time. The things that we do in this church will matter because there's a whole other generation that will never meet any of us. But us continuing to be Christians and to teach and to raise kids that know about God, that will teach them. It goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And it's so much bigger than us. Courage coupled with wisdom can enact divine reversals. So we saw Esther. She was courageous, but she was not rash. Courage does not necessarily mean you just jump up and have a knee-jerk reaction. That's not necessarily courage. She did the right thing after a lot of thought. They fasted. We can assume she's praying. She's preparing. She thought out what she needed to do. And even after thinking about the consequences, or the potential consequences, she still did it. So, courage and wisdom together. All right, just a couple minutes left, a few application questions. So, have you ever had to speak truth in a critical moment, even when it felt risky? Any examples that anybody'd like to share? Nobody. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I was in a situation when I was teaching where the principal had been accused of doing something, and I was going to have to testify that he either did or that I had seen it or not seen it, and I had not seen it. So that was kind of a uncomfortable situation. As you know, I was deposed.
Mm-hmm.
Deposed and all that. It ended up that it didn't go to court, but it was a little scary.
Sure, especially you bring in legal terms and lawyers and courts. Absolutely, that makes it real, right? Absolutely. Yeah, and so, of course, there was a lot of feeling of risk there. Yes?
When I worked at Radio Shack, there was a sales associate who was accused of stealing merchandise, and the manager asked me if I'd ever seen him, stealing any merchandise, and I said I had never seen him do that, and I said I'd testify to that in a court of law. And he said, you might have to.
Wow. Yeah. All right, good examples. All right, let's see the next one. So, how might you help others see God working in their lives through seemingly mundane events? So this is a good takeaway kind of question. This is an application, not only for ourselves, but how can we help the people around us understand some of the things that we're learning through this lesson? So think on that for next week.